You know the names: Washington, Jefferson, Madison, Hamilton, Franklin, Adams. These are the men we put on our money, carve into mountains, and teach every single child in American schools. But what if I told you there was a founding father just as brilliant, just as consequential, and arguably just as important to the survival of the United States? A man who sat in the same rooms, signed the same documents, and shaped the same republic. And yet, his name rarely makes it into the textbooks. His portrait hangs in no great gallery. His face is on no coin. His name was Gouverneur Morris, and this is his story. Gouverneur Morris was born in 1752 on a sprawling estate in Morrisania, New York, into one of the wealthiest and most powerful families in colonial America. He attended King's College, the institution we now call Columbia University, and graduated at just 16 years old. Let that sink in. 16. He became a lawyer, and by his mid-20s, he was already moving in the most elite political circles in the colonies. And here is where his story gets complicated and fascinating. His family was loyalist. His own half-brother fought for the British. Yet Gouverneur Morris chose the side of revolution. He became a passionate American patriot at a time when that choice could cost you everything: your estate, your freedom, your life. He served in the New York Provincial Congress. He was a delegate to the Continental Congress. He worked alongside Washington, Hamilton, and Jefferson during the most dangerous years in American history. And then, in 1787, he walked into a hall in Philadelphia that would define everything. The Constitutional Convention of 1787. 55 delegates, sweltering heat in Philadelphia. Months of argument, compromise, and political brinkmanship. Most people know that James Madison is called the father of the Constitution, and he deserves that title. His ideas, his Virginia plan, his meticulous notes, they shaped the framework of what was being built. But who actually wrote the Constitution? Who sat down, took all of the arguments, all of the competing drafts, all of the messy, contradictory ideas from 55 extraordinary egos, and turned them into one of the most elegant, enduring documents in the history of human government? That was Gouverneur Morris. He was the primary draftsman. The Committee of Style, the small group tasked with taking the rough draft and crafting the final language, put Morris in charge. And he delivered something remarkable. Those first 3 words of the Constitution, "We the people," are credited directly to Morris. The original draft read something far more cumbersome, listing the individual states. Morris rewrote it to open with a sweeping, universal declaration of collective identity. We the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union. 3 words, an entire philosophy of government, a radical claim that the power of this new nation flowed not from kings, not from states, not from elites, but from the people themselves. James Madison, who disagreed with Morris on more than a few things, later said that the finish given to the style and arrangement of the Constitution fairly belongs to the pen of Gouverneur Morris. The man literally wrote the document, word by word, sentence by sentence. So why don't we know his name? Here is where the story gets uncomfortable. And honestly, this is exactly why Gouverneur Morris is not taught more often. Because Gouverneur Morris said things that made people deeply, furiously uncomfortable. Things that, 230 years later,
still cut right to the heart of American contradictions. At the Constitutional Convention, when the debate over slavery arose, and it did arise brutally, Morris stood up and gave one of the most searing speeches ever delivered in American political history. He called slavery the curse of heaven on the states where it prevailed. He pointed directly at the hypocrisy of a nation founded on the principle that all men are created equal, while simultaneously enshrining the protection of human bondage into its founding document. He argued against the 3/5 compromise, the infamous clause that counted enslaved people as 3/5 of a person for the purposes of political representation, giving slaveholding states outsized power in Congress.
Morris saw it clearly. He named it plainly, and he lost. The political realities of the moment, the absolute necessity of keeping Southern states in the Union, meant that the compromise was made. Morris was furious. But he signed the document anyway, believing an imperfect union was better than no union at all. This is a man who held enormous contradictions. He was an aristocrat who believed in the people. He was a skeptic of democracy who wrote its greatest charter. He spoke against slavery in fiery terms, and yet he was not himself a perfect abolitionist. He was, in so many ways, a man of his time, struggling against the limits of that time. That complexity is exactly why history has a complicated relationship with him. He is too principled to ignore, and too complicated to celebrate simply. Let us pause for a moment, because Gouverneur Morris was not just a political theorist. The man lived like a character from a novel. He lost part of his leg in a carriage accident in 1780. Some rumors of the era, almost certainly exaggerated, suggested it was more scandalous circumstances. He walked on a wooden peg leg for the rest of his life, and reportedly carried it with an aristocratic swagger that impressed and irritated people in equal measure. In the late 1780s and early 1790s, Morris was sent to Europe as a diplomatic agent and later as U.S. minister to France, arriving just in time for the French Revolution. While Jefferson romanticized the French Revolution from thousands of miles away, Morris was there, in Paris, watching the guillotine fall, witnessing the terror firsthand. He was not impressed. He wrote back to Washington with remarkable clarity. This was not American-style liberty. This was mob rule descending into chaos and blood. He helped smuggle people out of France. He even stored papers for the French royal family. Morris was eventually expelled by the French government for being insufficiently enthusiastic about the revolution, which is one of history's more extraordinary diplomatic incidents. He returned to America as a United States Senator, then retired to his Morrisania estate, and continued writing, thinking, and irritating powerful people until his death in 1816. So we return to the central question. Why don't we know Gouverneur Morris? There are several reasons, and they are worth understanding, because the way history forgets people tells us something profound about what history chooses to remember. First, Morris was not a myth maker. The founders who are celebrated most are the ones who crafted compelling narratives about themselves. Jefferson wrote constantly. Franklin wrote constantly. Hamilton, thanks in part to a certain Broadway musical, has had a full-scale cultural renaissance. Morris wrote diary entries and letters that were breathtakingly honest, sometimes too honest. He documented his own flaws, his cynicism, his complicated views on democracy. He gave historians too much nuance and not enough legend. Second, Morris had no great political party to champion him. The Jeffersonians built Jefferson into a deity.
The Hamiltonians did the same. Morris was never the standard-bearer of a movement. He was an independent thinker, suspicious of factions, which meant no faction fought to preserve his legacy. Third, his views on democracy were uncomfortable for a democratic nation to celebrate. Morris was, in many ways, skeptical of pure majoritarianism. He believed in strong institutions, checks on popular passion, and the rule of law above the rule of the mob. These are not exactly simple, crowd-pleasing talking points. And fourth, perhaps most importantly, Morris did not leave behind a family dynasty or political heirs who would carry his name forward. He married late, had one child, and his line did not persist as a political force. History often remembers those with successors. Morris left ideas, and ideas, without advocates, can fall silent. Here is the thing about Gouverneur Morris. He matters right now, maybe more than ever. We live in an era of intense debate about what American democracy means, what the Constitution actually says, what its framers actually intended. These arguments play out in courtrooms, in Congress, in living rooms, in social media feeds. And when we have those debates, we should know the man who wrote the words. We should understand that the Constitution was not handed down from some abstract, unified founding consciousness. It was hammered out through argument, compromise, and the extraordinary editorial labor of one brilliant, difficult, complicated man.
When Gouverneur Morris wrote, "We the people," he was making a deliberate choice, a philosophical statement. He was saying that the legitimacy of this government rests on the consent of the governed, not the power of states, not the authority of elites. That idea is still contested. That idea is still alive. And knowing who wrote it and why changes how we read it. Morris also reminds us that political courage means saying true things, even when the room does not want to hear them. His speech against slavery at the convention did not win, but it was recorded, it was preserved. And today, reading it, we can see that someone in that room knew. Someone said it plainly. That matters. Gouverneur Morris, 1752 to 1816. He stood in the room where it happened. He held the pen that shaped the most consequential sentence in American legal history. He was brilliant, imperfect, courageous, contradictory. In other words, deeply human. And history, which loves its heroes uncomplicated and its stories clean, never quite knew what to do with him. Maybe that is exactly why we should pay attention. The founding father nobody wants to talk about? Perhaps it is time we start.